All right, boys and girls, we are here for another reading wit and wisdom lesson. This is still Thank You, Mr. Falker, and we're still trying to figure out what reading means to Trisha. And so this is a lesson 4. Lesson 4. So, in this lesson, students analyze the essential meaning of Thank You, Mr. Falker, considering what reading means to Trisha and what the meaning suggests about the power of reading. So, today we're going to focus on the essential meaning of the text. And remember, we are trying to figure out for our essential meaning, our central question, how does reading help us build knowledge? So in this one, we're going to talk about the essential meaning of this particular text. So we're going to take a closer look at the focusing question, and we are introduced to recording evidence on an evidence organizer. Okay, so by the end, you're going to write 2 or 3 sentences about the essential meaning of the text. So let's get started. So let's review our essential question that you will answer by Friday. How does reading help us build knowledge? We need to know why reading is important. And then by the time we get off of this book on Friday, you will be able to answer, what does reading mean to Trisha in Thank You, Mr. Falker? By the end of today's lesson, you'll be able to answer the essential meaning of Thank You, Mr. Falker. And to help us do that, we are going to figure out, how do I write about Thank You, Mr. Falker? All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to learn some new vocabulary words, just like we did about the word torture. So the first one, and these go together, the word is distill. Distill is a verb. It is something that you do. And what they are doing is to find the most important part, to draw out. And so today you're going to distill the text so that we can find the essential, which is the next vocabulary word, the essential meaning of the text. So we're to distill means to draw out the parts. It means to find the most important part. So we're going to distill the text. We're going to find the most important parts of the text. And then we're going to do that so we can find the essential meaning, the very important meaning, the key meaning of this text. So you need to distill, find the most important parts to figure out the essential, which is an adjective, part of the text, the most important part of the text. All right, so now what you need to do is go to your seesaw and you're going to write a sentence for each new vocabulary word. So why is it important for readers to think about the essential meaning of a text? It's important to understand the big ideas in the text. And it's important to understand what ideas a text communicates to us. And then it's also important to understand that the essential meaning to connect the text to other texts or ideas. All right, so I'm going to go back because now that I have given you some examples, you are going to write in a sentence using the word distill. So remember, distill means to find the most important part or to draw out. So you need to put that in a complete sentence, capital letter, end mark, in a sentence. And then for number 2, you're going to write essential in a sentence. Capital letter, end mark, spaces, making sense. Go ahead now, go to your Seesaw account and complete those 2 sentences for distill and essential. When you are done, you may press play to continue. Go. All right, so now the next thing that we are going to do is we're going to get to use an evidence organizer. We're going to use the evidence organizer to organize our thoughts about the text. So this right here, I'm going to read aloud a part of Thank You, Mr. Falker. And as I read aloud, you should be listening for evidence that helps you answer a specific question on your organizer. So the question is, How does Trisha feel before she learns to read? We already know how she feels, okay? But what you're going to be doing is listening for evidence that helps you answer that question, okay? Again, you should remember from the last few days how Trisha feels before she learns to read. But you're going to pay attention to the evidence, okay? I know we don't have the page, but you're going to write down what the evidence is. Because you guys don't have the book in front of you, you don't know the page number. I don't have the book in front of me. I don't know the page number. All right. But we do know what the text will say. And then we can use that evidence to answer our question. All right. So let's go to the text. Here is the first one. This is before she learns to read.
In first grade, you'll learn to read, her brother said. In first grade, Trisha sat in a circle with other kids. They were all holding Our Neighborhood, their first reader, sounding out letters and words. They said, be, oi, boy, and ook, look. The teacher smiled at them when they put all the sounds together and got a word right. But when Trisha looked at a page, all she saw were wiggling shapes. And when she tried to sound out words, the other kids laughed at her. Trisha, what are you looking at in that book? They'd say. I'm reading, she'd say back to them. But her teacher would move on to the next person. Always when it was her turn to read, her teacher had to help her with every single word. And while the other kids moved up in the second reader and third reader, she stayed alone in Our Neighborhood. Trisha began to feel different. She began to feel dumb.
All right, so we're going to stop right there and we're going to go back to our evidence organizer. So how does Trisha feel at the beginning before she learned to read? So you may go ahead and in your evidence organizer, you may write down how she feels before she learned to read. Please put this in a complete sentence. Before Trisha learned to read, she felt, or before she learned to read, Trisha felt. And then you're going to go to the page, the text evidence over here, and tell us what from the text told you or showed you that's how she felt. So you may pause the video and you're going to answer the question, how does Trisha feel before she learned to read, in a complete sentence? And then you're going to give us what evidence told you or showed you that's how she felt before she learned to read. You may pause the video to answer number 1, and then you may press play when you're ready to continue. Go. All right, so now we're going to talk about how does Trisha feel after she learned to read. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to go to the story and we are going to watch the video where she learns to read. I think that's what this one is. Okay, let's see.
But in the new school, it was the same. When she tried to read, she stumbled over words. The cat ran. She was reading like a baby in the third grade. And when her teacher read along with them and called on Trisha for an answer, she gave the wrong answer every time. Hey, dummy, a boy called out to her on the playground. How come you are so dumb? Other kids stood near him and they laughed. Trisha could feel the tears burning in her eyes. How she longed to go back to her grandparents' farm in Michigan.
Okay, so we're still talking about how she felt before she learned to read. So you should have plenty to write down there. You could have written down all Trisha saw were wiggling shapes. Okay, this is some of the evidence. Other kids laughed at her when she tried to read aloud. Trisha felt dumb. These are words from the text. She felt that she was reading like a baby. Kids teased her and called her a dummy. This is all text evidence to tell us how she felt before she learned to read. She wanted to move back to Michigan. So all of those things should have told you how Trisha felt before she learned to read. Remember, we talked about this even yesterday. So now we know for sure Trisha felt sad and alone before she learned to read. And those things, the wiggling shapes, the other kids laughed at her. She felt dumb, reading like a baby, dummy, wanted to move back to Michigan. That all proves to us that she felt sad and alone. Okay, now we're going to look at how she felt at the end of the story after she learned to read. Come on over here. All right, here we go.
That night, Trisha ran home without stopping to catch her breath. She bounded up the front steps, threw open her front door, and ran through the dining room to the kitchen. She climbed up on the cupboard and grabbed a jar of honey. Then she went into the living room and found the book on the shelf. The very book that her grandpa had shown her so many years ago. She spooned honey on the cover and tasted the sweetness and said to herself, "The honey is sweet, and so is knowledge. But knowledge is like the bee who made the honey. It has to be chased through the pages of a book." Then she held the book, honey and all, close to her chest. She could feel tears roll down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were happy. So very happy. The rest of the year became an odyssey of discovery and adventure for the little girl. She learned to love school. I know because that little girl was me, Patricia Polacco. I saw Mr. Fokker again some 30 years later at a wedding. I walked up to him and introduced myself. At first, he had difficulty placing me, and I told him who I was and how he had changed my life so many years ago. He hugged me and asked me what I did for a living. "Why, Mr. Fokker," I answered, "I make books for children. Thank you."
All right, so now you should be able to answer how Trisha feels at the end of the story after she learned to read. I know that we've already talked about this the other day. We should remember that Trisha feels happy and excited after she learned to read. But now that we've taken a closer look at the evidence, you should now be able to write down some evidence that supports or tells you how you know that she is happy and excited. Some of the things that you could write down would be that Trisha was excited that she ran home without stopping to catch her breath. She cried, she was so happy. Trisha learned that she loved school. Those were all things that were told in the book that told us that she was happy and excited after she learned to read. So go ahead and pause the video and write down how she feels after she learned to read, and write down the evidence that told you that's how she felt. When you are ready, you may press play to continue. Go. All right, so now we have this quick write down here at the bottom, and we did a quick write yesterday, and the quick write, remember, is just for us to quickly, we're not going to focus on like grammar or anything else like that. We're really just focusing on quickly getting our thoughts down from our brain down to the paper. All right, so when we think about this graphic organizer, the items above should help us write down our central message. All right, so what is a central message? A central message is like a theme, like what was the text about? What was the text mostly about? Make sure to think about what the text was mostly about. All right, so you should have come up with what that reading means to Trisha. At the beginning, she didn't know how to read, and at the end, she did a lot of work and she put in a lot of time and effort with her teachers to learn to read. So the central message is that you should not give up. You should work hard even when things are difficult. Tell yourself what the central message is. Think about it. What you should have taken away. What was the theme? What was the big essential meaning from the text? And then write it down. Very good. I like that some of those remembered that I had even told them that you should not give up when things get difficult. You should keep going. Just because something is hard, that does not mean that you stop. You got to keep pushing through it. So go ahead and make sure that you have all components of this written down so you can turn it into Seesaw. All right, so it says in the first grade, Trisha sat in a circle with other kids. They were all holding our neighborhood, their first readers, sounding out letters and words. They said, blah, 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 oh, boy, 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 look. The teacher smiled at them when they put all the sounds and words that they got right. But Trisha looked at the page. All she saw were wiggling shapes, and she tried to sound out the words. So they are using the text, and they're going to use that for their evidence. So before, these are some of the text evidence that you could have written down. All right, so now we're going to talk about the after to make sure that you have your organizer down. It said that night, Trisha ran home without stopping to catch her breath. She bounded up from the front steps, threw open the front door, and ran through the dining room to the kitchen. She climbed up on the cupboard and grabbed a jar of honey. Then she went into the living room and found the book on the shelf, the very book that her grandpa had shown her many, many years ago. She spooned honey on the cover and tasted the sweetness and said to herself, "This honey is sweet, and so is knowledge. But knowledge is like the bee who made the honey. It has to be chased through the pages of a book." All right, so now you should have been able to write down some of the evidence to help you tell how she felt after she learned to read. All right, so using this graphic organizer has helped you build your understanding. It's helped you identify the important information from the text that's most important to that should be understanding the essential meaning. Understanding, using the evidence organizer guided you in choosing the evidence that was most important to building your understanding of the central meaning. All right. So now you're going to get to your craft question, because remember, today we're starting to get ready for that essential question that you have at the very end. All right. So now you're going to put all of this information together, all your ideas from Thank You, Mr. Falker, as you write about your essential meaning. All right. So you may use these sentence frames. You may choose one 1, 2, or 3, which one do you want to write? The essential meaning is blank, and I know this because blank. Or do you want to write number 2? The biggest idea is blank. I know this because blank. Or 3, the most important lesson Trisha learns about blank is, I know this because. This is going to be picked up for a grade. I'll say that again. This is going to be picked up for a grade. You may choose numbers 1, 2, or 3 to write. You do not have to write all 3 of them. Choose one of them and write the sentence filling in the missing information. So again, the essential meaning is, I know this because. The biggest idea of the book is, I know this because. Or number 3, the most important lesson Trisha learns about blank is blank, and I know this because blank. All right, so you should go to your Seesaw, complete either sentence 1, 2, or 3 on the lines in a complete sentence with nice handwriting, capitalization, end mark, and this will be picked up for a grade. You may pause the video and go to that now, and when you are done, press play to continue. All right, so now we are going to put all of our ideas about Thank You, Mr. Falker together and write that essential meaning. Again, remember, you should have only written one of those sentences, not all of them. You should have chose either the first one, the second, or the third. And boys and girls, that is it for today's lesson. And we will see you again tomorrow on Friday as we wrap it up and we're able to answer the essential question and the focusing question. Have a great day.